Okay, another quick video. This is a continuation really from the previous video demonstrating how we can use Ansible to automate the installation and configuration of ThinManager. This particular video is going to use FactoryTalk Activation, and therefore our install playbook will install FactoryTalk Activation Manager, as well as automatically activate an FTA license, and then configure ThinManager to use that license. The way that we control that in this particular playbook is through this hosts file, where you'll see that we're using some hosts variables to control whether or not we're going to use FactoryTalk Activation Manager. That's set by this variable here. If we were going to be using ThinManager activation, we would just set this to a 0. But for FactoryTalk Activation, we then can also provide the serial number as well as the product key and the quantity that we want to install. Now, in order for that to work, our target machine will have to have an internet connection in order to activate that license automatically. If we instead don't want to activate that license automatically, we can just simply set the quantity to 0, and then the playbook won't attempt to activate it. So if we take a look, this is the primary installation playbook, and then we have a configuration playbook as well. So let's see how this looks in action. Of course, this is my target virtual machine. It doesn't have anything installed on it currently. It is just a Windows Server 2019 build. So let's come back over to my Ubuntu build where Ansible is installed. We're going to launch that install playbook. And this playbook takes a little bit of time to install, and that's because the FactoryTalk Activation Manager requires the .NET Framework, which requires a reboot. It also has a number of other dependencies, and then a final reboot. So there'll actually be 2 reboots as a result of using FactoryTalk Activation Manager. The first thing that we install, just like we did in the previous video, is the Windows Firewall configuration utility. We're now installing the ThinManager MSI. We're breaking that out and installing it separately because it allows us to set some install parameters like enabling the API. That install goes pretty quickly. I think we are looking at roughly like 20 seconds for the ThinManager install. We then get a registry key value to determine whether or not the version of the .NET Framework that we need for FactoryTalk Activation is installed or not. If it isn't, then we're going to go ahead and install the .NET Framework here. And that is a long task. It takes around 2 minutes to complete on this system. And then there will be a reboot. I'll try to speed up the video in this segment so we're not sitting here waiting. Okay, we're back here. The .NET Framework has been installed, and now the target machine is going through a reboot. This also takes a little bit of time, so we're going to go ahead and fast forward through that. Okay, now we're back. The .NET Framework is installed, and the playbook has now transitioned to installing FactoryTalk Activation Manager. Again, another long-running task, a little more than 2 minutes that we'll go ahead and skip right through. Okay, the FactoryTalk Activation Manager install is completed. It's now requiring a reboot, just like the .NET Framework did before it. And this particular step, it takes about 45 seconds or so to complete. So I'll go ahead and pause the recording and resume once it comes back. Okay, the reboots come back. We've now transitioned to the play where we're automatically going to activate the FTA license that was provided in our hosts file. Again, let's go back and take a quick peek at that. That's in our hosts file here. And then for each of the target machines that we're installing ThinManager on, we can specify whether or not we're going to install FTA, and if so, do we want to automatically activate the license? So that's where that's provided, and that's what we're leveraging here in this particular play to automatically activate the FTA license. And this one, again, took a little bit of time. I think it's requiring some services to come up here that aren't completely ready. But this one took a little more than 2 minutes for it to execute in my system. So I'll go ahead and pause so we're not waiting for it. Okay, we're back. It looks like that activated properly, and we're now doing some assignment here for ThinManager, where we're going to take a defined domain user, add it to the local admins group, because we're going to use that domain account to run the Thin Server service, which is a best practice. So we're also making sure that that domain account has the permission to run as a service. And then we're going to finish up by adding some firewall rules to the Windows firewall for the various ports that ThinManager utilizes for activities in ThinManager. Okay, we're all wrapped up here with this playbook. If we go ahead and now log in to our target machine, we will see several things that have taken place. Of course, the first being that we have ThinManager installed. If we take a look at FactoryTalk Activation Manager, and that takes a few seconds here to launch, but we should also see that we've successfully activated the serial number and product key with the correct quantity that we provided in that hosts file. And we'll take a peek at that here in a second. If I go ahead and say manage activations, we'll see sure enough there is that license, and we have a total of 2. So that worked as expected. Now at this point, what we want to do is transition to the automation of ThinManager. So we're going to run the configuration playbook, and that's going to take advantage of the ThinManager REST API again. And what we're going to basically see here is logging into the API to obtain an API key that we will then use for all the subsequent REST API calls, like setting the initial database configuration password. We're now going to add the activation, the FTA activation to ThinManager, and we're going to create some basic objects in ThinManager, like an RDS display server, an RDS display client, and then we're going to add a terminal as well. All of that can be automated using the REST API. And then we're also going to wrap it up by setting some system settings in ThinManager, like enabling the Pixie server and disabling device authentication. Now, once that playbook is complete, we can go into ThinManager here and see the results. We'll see the results here. The one reason why we got that message there is that there is an issue with the one API endpoint for setting the licensing mode. You'll see that we did not set it to FTA. There is an endpoint to do that. Right now, we're working on fixing that. But you'll see that by setting that licensing mode, that the license that I did add through the API, sure enough, is here. And then the other things that we accomplished there, of course, were adding a RDS display server through the REST API. We added an RDS display client, and we also added a terminal. The other thing that we did through the APIs, we enabled the Pixie server. And lastly, we disabled device authentication, which you can see here.